program is brought to you by Audible. Go to www.audibletrial.com/zombiepopcorn, no hyphen, to get a free audiobook download. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We are Coalesce. Here with me, as always, is my fellow co-host, Jason.
Hello.
And I am Matt. Last week, for those of you who joined us, we talked about just the mission of our show, which is Coalesce. It's all in the name. Coalesce just means to come together from different parts. And so, as we established last time, Jason is an anarchist atheist, and I am a Christian with a very mutt-like background.
And this is the Barry White episode.
Yes. Jason, unfortunately, has been sick. My Pentecostal heritage tells me to pray for him. His atheism says, call the hospital.
We'll see which one works. Stay tuned.
But last time we talked about human trafficking, and we gave the action step of asking everyone to go to the petition we posted on the Zombie Popcorn site to sign in support of Californians against sexual exploitation. And so hopefully everyone did that. That petition is still posted from that first week. But we also talked about mainly how the evangelical church and the stream I'm coming from has in the past, at least in the last century, tended to shy away from social justice causes, which actually Jason this week found out something very interesting about the Californians against sexual exploitation people, if you want to.
No, we'll save that for another show.
Oh.
That's a whole nother topic.
The secret answer is they were Christians who do all their stuff in churches.
Yeah.
But which doesn't really mean anything, but it was kind of cool to kind of see evangelicals engaging again per last week's conversation. But this week we actually have a special guest with us. Our special guest name is Beth Saramet.
Hi.
And I've known Beth for probably about almost 4 years, and we've done some work together in Regions chapter of the International Justice Mission. And I will let Beth introduce herself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Beth Saramet. I'm originally from New Hampshire, and I got involved with topics of injustice like human trafficking when I was studying communications at Oral Roberts University out in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I saw a documentary that the International Justice Mission put out called The End of Slavery, and it really impacted me enough to move to the D.C. area, kind of sort of in Virginia Beach. From here, I was one of the ones that started the International Justice Mission chapter at Regent University, and it's just been kind of a growing passion of mine. Once you know, then you can't play the ignorant card anymore.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
So tell us a little bit about the group that you just mentioned.
The International Justice Mission.
Yep.
They are based out of Washington, D.C., and they address 5 different issues. One is human trafficking, which they equate to labor, and just kind of the broad terms, specifically sex trafficking, police brutality, illegal detentions of persons, and illegal property seizure. They are a Christian-based organization, and actually yesterday their president was given the honor of one of 2012's anti-human trafficking leaders by Hillary Clinton. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I saw that. Saw the photos from it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So.
Well, moving forward, I believe you were the one who typed out some of these questions, but we did prepare some questions for you because I know you had said to me that fighting poverty was a good part of you're thrust against injustice, and one of the issues you tend to focus on. So I guess the first question would be, how would you define poverty?
Sure.
Well, I guess the first question before we go ahead
Sure.
and define
No,
that.
no.
But, after defining it, tell us why you feel poverty should be the focus of helping to end the human trafficking.
Sure. And the definition might clarify that a little bit. Yeah. But the definition that I like is one state of internal conflict rooted in the perceived disability to reach self-actualization, leading to external patterns of developmental stagnation. And I really believe that poverty it starts internally in kind of a mindset or an attitude. And while it is therefore, like, it's measured by externalities, but it really does start inside. And if you can change the internal belief systems, then a lot of times that promotes external change quicker. I think that
that sounds great, but just to be more detailed, what does that mean? I mean, how is that up? Like, give me an example of how in real world that would that philosophy would be represented, like if it's internal.
Sure.
Give an example.
Sure. I would say the cyclic, I can never say that word, patterns of poverty kind of show that the generational kind of, I'm stuck in this lifestyle because my father was this, or, I'm actually currently reading this book. It's called Opium Nation, and it's about the opium trade in Afghanistan and just how there's this perception of there's no alternative because this is what's always been done. And it's not until some external or other opinion kind of infiltrates that cycle and breaks it that they realize, there's other alternatives, there's other options.
So let me paint a picture. Like in California and in a lot of border states here in the States, there is a huge issues with people going over the border to Mexico, promising individuals great work and great money, and they're like, and the individuals in the other country will say, well, that would be great, but I don't have the money to come over. And the guy, the slave master, the trader says, well, tell you what, you come over, I'll pay for it, you work it off, and you can pay us back, you'll owe us.
Right.
So they'll come over, they'll take their papers and put them to work. And when it's come payday, they sit down at the table, put their money in full on the table next to a black book. And in this black book, they said, okay, it's cost us this much to bring you over, plus this interest.
Right.
Plus this, because we housed you and we fed you, even though you slept on the floor the entire time. So you still gave you a place to live, gave you a place to eat. So here, if you're lucky, here's $1. Yeah. Normally. And this continues. Right. And after a while, the individual who was brought over realize that they're in a bad place. But because of their culture and the upbringing, they usually don't think they don't think that they're enslaved. They don't think that there's something bad because there's this pride element of an individual that wouldn't speak out to ask for help. They just know that they got themselves in a bad position. And it was for their bad choices, not that these people are totally taking advantage of it, like there's an outside system. So in that real life example, is that kind of what you're saying, is like with that individual looking into himself saying, well, this is not really bad, just put myself in a bad situation to get better later? Is that kind of
and that talks to a lot. One of my favorite, I was actually telling Matt this before we came here, but one of my favorite definitions of injustice is simply the exploitation of vulnerability, whatever that vulnerability is. And for the situation that you're describing, it would be, like a better life opportunity, something that he sees that could maybe break the cycle that he or she already finds him or herself in, of maybe like living just for the next meal or just for the next measly paycheck or whatever it is. And that the situation that you described is very common, especially like in India, where literally they'll borrow like $5 and then it will it's been documented that 5 generations later, they're still paying off that $5 because exactly what you said. So, I think there's a lot of truth to that.
There was an interview that I read just recently about a young woman who was from Russia, and she went to go found an ad and wanted to go make money to send back home to her family.
Yep.
And it turned out to be this part of the sex slave industry. And she was a young girl, and she was finally rescued. And when they asked her, what made you keep going? What kept your strength there and all of it? And she said, well, my soul died a long time ago. What kept me is they kept saying that they knew where my 9-year-old brother lived.
Yep.
And horrible stuff like that. And
I think, if I can just interject really quickly, the slavery, it really is a total, like, it's not just tangibly enslaved, but you mentioned Eastern Europe, and there's a place called the breaking grounds, and immediately after, particularly girls are taken, they're sent to these breaking grounds where they are just gang raped repeatedly, and it's for like submission, so they'll know mentally, like, there is no other alternative for me but to comply with what they're saying.
There's definitely a systematic system to it. It's like when they first come in and raid the place and steal the girls, they're dressed as police officers. Yes. They're dressed as officials.
And sometimes they're real.
Yeah. And
real police officers.
That is true. There's been a lot of cases. And so, and once they're kidnapped, they're gang raped after that. So that they automatically are put in that example of that. They can't go to the authorities because the authorities did this to me. There's no one else to go, and they're moved around a lot. But we're getting off on.
Sorry.
Going back to your definition of poverty. Yeah. So you feel by the definition of poverty, it's something that I guess I'm not understanding. It's on the it's inside that the way that we view ourselves inside that puts us in poverty. I think, and maybe it's because I'm looking at poverty as in the terms of the level of measurement that privileged class puts upon on the poor class. It's like, well, you don't have, whatever material goods, you don't have enough money to survive. And in extreme cases, it's they don't have water or shelter or whatever, and it's because they're being oppressed by the privileged class. And that's why I'm asking you to clarify, because I think I'm having a hard time understanding just because I'm used to that definition. Right.
And I would agree with that definition too. I just think in order to really break that cycle of, the privileged class, maybe, just kind of keeping the lower class in that physical state of poverty, I think it's more than just a physical thing. I think a manifestation. I think that it's really internal. Like, the mindset of the oppressor, if you will, is way different than the mindset of the person in poverty, the victim, But I don't see any reason why the victim can't not become the oppressor, but can't rise out of their situation.
Well, and I guess we talked a little bit beforehand about Maslov. And so if you want to talk about Maslov's hierarchy at all and how you saw that playing into it as well.
Yeah, I did. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think that I don't think that, and this kind of goes to your point of why it stays in this cyclic pattern of, I don't think you can expect people to think abstractly in terms of morality. This, when tangibly they don't even know if they're going to have dinner on the table that night. And I'm trying to think what else I was talking about with that.
Well, I think
what were you getting at?
It was one of those things where, we expect people in order to overcome poverty sometimes, especially the way emergency food drops are done. The way we do relief is in this kind of like long-term way where we give them seeds and other things for crops. But like in the short term, there's no immediate help as well. So like we're telling them plan for long-term infrastructure and they're trying to survive. So mentally, like, you're asking people who aren't meeting the basic needs to get to self-actualization to think about self-actualization before their basic needs are met.
But don't you think that labeling things as poverty and victimizing the situation is is not really addressing the issue, is not really looking at it as like, because when you start saying this, they're poverty stricken or they need our help, it kind of turns it into a victimization. It kind of puts it kind of takes away the focus on why this stuff is happening, why these people are being traded, why these people are being exploited. And it makes it an issue about, well, it's they're poverty, they're poor.
Yeah.
But I mean, we could look at the history of humans. There's tribes who have had less than these people who are poverty stricken, and they live equal. I mean, just because you don't have every schoolhouse, you don't have a church, you don't have or whatever, doesn't mean that you have a bad life.
And I think that goes back to the inward mentality of it.
Yeah.
And why I think
but that's what I'm saying is, like, if you come in and saying that they're being taken advantage of, and they're allowing it themselves to be taken advantage of because they don't know any better. They don't understand the bigger workings of the world. I mean, I see the same argument in the animal rights movement of people who consume animals who say, well, these animals were born in factory farms. They're born to be eaten. So they don't know anything about freedom. They don't know anything about what it is to death bathe in the fields. They don't know what it's like to feel the sun on their back. And that takes away that individual from it. That takes away that personal feel to it. And when you do that, you take away, you kind of blur, you make it a victimization. And victimization is not a solution. There's not a path to find a solution.
I agree.
Well, and I would say, and one of the things, again, we talked a little bit about Maslov today because I think the issue of self-actualization comes out. We were talking about the issue of self-actualization today and how the issue of self-actualization affects many different cultures in many different ways, not just people who are in an impoverished situation, but even people who are in the land of plenty. And it manifests itself differently depending on cultures, but you talked a little bit about that. Do you want to, you gave a few examples. There was Thailand, where that desire for self-actualization comes out in terms of...
I'm sorry, I'm not following you.
Oh, that stress causes a lack of self-actualization.
Yes. And we were talking about how slavery really flourishes. You see it in countries and situations where there is a lot of stress. And so, for example, Asia, Thailand, that was one of the places that I had researched fairly extensively, but in there being no lack of food and just what you were talking about, those basic human rights, if you will, like the food, the shelter, the clothing, which interestingly enough, there's a nonprofit that works there that said you can always tell the families that really do love their children that sell them, because the families that really do love them will sell them locally, and the families that really are just after the money will sell them internationally or whatever. But anyway, so that the stress there would be a lack, if you will. In the Middle East, there's been war forever. You were talking about Palestine, everything, war forever. There's no stable economy. And so opium is really like 92% of, that stabilizes their economy. For the U.S., I think that looks like, because the U.S. is 25% of slavery. And for the U.S., I think that looks like this trying to balance like success at work versus success in the family, and being kind of culturalized to not like your job and just have to settle for Monday through Friday and live for the weekends and just that rut and routine. And so the solution there is trafficking. We see it more in porn and buying porn in the U.S., but it's the same thing. There's a girl behind there. There's a child behind there. There's a real person. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah. And I think too, I mean, my master's thesis was on the issue of, I was talking about Kierkegaard, and anyone who, I always mention Kierkegaard. I'm sure Bob's watching right now going, there he goes again, Kierkegaard. But Kierkegaard's whole big thing was that, was very much that the inward person, the individual, needs to be changed before any real lasting social change can take place. And I think that would apply to both rich and poor. Like at some point there's a mentality, whether it's a victim mentality, oppressor mentality, whether it's a desire for riches and success, whatever it is. And this is where the faith issue comes in. Jesus talks about the poor 2 big times, and he talks about them other times too, but 2 of the big times is when he talks about the Beatitudes. And the one Beatitude, in Luke, he's dealing with the physical issue of being poor, at least in terms of how that evangelist writes it. He says, blessed are you who are poor, for you'll be, what is it? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the okay, yeah, because yours will be the kingdom. And then it says, woe to you who are rich, because you have your life here. You've received all the reward you're going to get. But then in Matthew's gospel, he says, blessed are the poor in spirit. So in both of those situations, the poor, Jesus addresses the poor in 2 different ways. He addresses the issue of the outward poorness, but in Matthew, it really goes to the issue of the inward poorness of man's soul apart from God, which for me points to the issue of evil and suffering, like people who are apart from God or think they know God but don't really, like all those things. A lack of right relationship with God in some ways causes an attempt to actualize oneself elsewhere. So for me, the issue of if you don't recognize your poverty in spirit, and if you just go with the crowd and the cultural expectations, whether it's you're the slave laborer who's like, well, maybe it'll get better, and this is better than what it was, or if you're the oppressor.
But that doesn't even address the issue, because how can you accept something and embrace something such as poverty when it's a definition not defined by you or your culture? It's defined by the oppressors. It's defined by the outside world looking in. It's not like poor people are sitting around their homes and saying, oh, look, we're in poverty. It's not defined that way. When you're poor, believe me, I've squatted and lived on the streets, train hopped. I'm not saying the people that I've been around that they've lived in on the bottom, and they never once sat around and it's like, oh, I wish somebody would come help me. I wish I could seek my inner self to find this better me. It was this is me, this is my life, I enjoy it. Though they were not being exploited, though were not being taken advantage of in the sense of that these individuals are. What I'm getting at is I don't see how you can go into a place or look at a place and say, well, they need to come in terms with their poverty, spiritually and physically, when they don't understand. There's not a definition for them. They don't see themselves that way.
Well, in spiritual poverty, maybe moving us into the place of, that's more or less saying there's a religious aspect to that for me personally. Now, as far as the issue of poverty, I think the question you're asking is about the subjective nature of how do we understand what poverty is, right? Like when is, like we're saying to someone else, this is when you have enough to not be poor. Is that generally what you're saying? Like there's a cultural expectation of saying this is what it means to have enough. I think if you're dying of not having food, that's when you're
$1.25 a day living on. I think that's the definition of extreme poverty.
Right, the definition of extreme poverty, when you're dying of diseases that can be cured, when you're dying of food that's available and just doesn't get there, when you're naked and for whatever, you sent me that article about textile waste today, like when you're naked and you're not clothed because you're just in a poor place, an oppressed place or whatever. Like those are the issues like that can be addressed in some way. I don't want to be, the colonial white hope, but at the same time, I guess it's the question of dealing with like, what does that Christian aspect of charity look like when you actually want to do it to someone who is dying of a shortage of food because of shortage of resources? And maybe it goes to changing the systemic culture because some of these people don't have the resources because corporations come in and buy everything. But do you have any thoughts about?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts, but I just honestly feel that kind of the same way that I feel about me broadcasting me being an atheist, or I feel that if we approach the problem by trying to, and no offense to you, but if we approach the problem to our focus being poverty, and poverty as a mass is defined as the lack of something that you should have, defined by the outside source, then I think you will never succeed. I don't think you can patch problems, but for the overall picture, it's an ongoing battle. It's not going to be. And
the poor you always have.
What's that?
I said the poor you'll always have with you.
I mean, yeah, I mean, because the emails that we got, and thanks to everybody who wrote in and commented it and left your comments wherever you left them, because people even said that. They said they went to visit the Vatican, and they just thought it was very ironic that there's this charitable work, and there are people, deformed people, hungry people, right outside their footsteps, begging and dying and starving, and yet, it's like, as you were saying, I guess this is where the bridge comes in, is like, you have to change yourself first from the inside out, and redefine your definition of poverty, and I guess in that case of the Vatican is like, yeah, if you want to stop hunger, you want to stop. I mean, not just necessarily the Vatican, us right now. There's people outside.
I guess I want to make it clear. I'm not saying like, well, convert and then like all your problems go away, because that's not.
Well, I don't think anybody. Hopefully,
I
nobody's listening and got. I didn't take that.
I'm thinking holistic. Like, I'm thinking overall human flourishing. Like,
yeah.
What does it mean for a human being to flourish? That type of thing.
Well, I mean, I guess it goes back to what are basic human rights. What is the basic necessity that we need to survive?
Do you have any thought? I know the UN has their list, and I know, it becomes a war between food, shelter, clothing, and food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, and that's part of the debate even we haven't.
And see, and that's what I have a problem with, the outside force putting definitions to things. That's why I have the problem with the word poverty. That's why I have problems with individuals and groups. I mean, great. I think ending poverty of the definition that is great. I think it's a noble thing, but I have a problem the way we approach it. And
what would be your solution?
Gun them down. No, I'm just kidding.
Nice, man.
And that's the thing is
anarchy.
Yeah, no, that's not the word. That's not what it is.
That's not. I know. I've defended anarchy. Thank you.
By asking me, do I know another anarchist? All you anarchists look the same.
Sad.
Just in black.
Sad. Well, if I can just interject really quick.
Yeah, please do.
In terms of the whole, like, trafficking, cyclic, right? They have this definition of poverty as being cyclic or addictive. And even, you probably know this, but like when girls, even boys or whatever, are taken out of their physical situation of being trafficked and they're freed and you think that's awesome, a lot of the times they'll go back. I volunteered at a homeless shelter, I don't know, 3 years something.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
To teach English. And the man who owned it, he was actually homeless himself at one point, and he would tell me like 2 weeks after giving someone a job and an apartment, like they'll be back on the streets because they don't have the life skills, and it's that like internal, and that's why his vision was counseling plays a huge part in getting to that like internal root of what's caught and breaking that cycle.
Yeah. And that's definitely important. That is definitely yes. That is very important.
And I brought up the spiritual side. I mean, from your definition, she was going after Maslov and the psychological need. So I mean,
but in the
bring
reports,
the physical to us.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the going back. Yes, it is true with the homeless and people who are freshly out of prison, that they end up going back either to the streets or back to prison because they don't know how to cope in the world. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to human trafficking issues, I found that when you dig deeper into the reports about saying that the people go back, mm-hmm. the children go back, the girls go back, it is not by choice that they go back. There's been several incidents where there's one of the most popular reports was a young lady. She escaped and she forged her documents and got on a bus, and during immigration they saw that she forged her documents. She deliberately did that so she would get away from these people, and immigration said, oh, you forged these, you're going to jail. When she got out of jail, they sent her back, and guess where they delivered her to? Right back to the same people.
Yeah.
I mean, the person that sold her the first time was there waiting for her to get out and took her. And it's it's an immigration problem. It's just policy and people not being smart about their jobs. And good.
I guess that would be my one thing. I mean, again, the issue of outside forces defining poverty, I get the whole idea of like, the whole, like, who are you to, I get that. I guess it's like when poverty and lack of opportunity and lack of alternatives lead people into those situations where they can be exploited.
Yeah.
I would like to end the conditions that end that opportunity for exploitation.
But
so how does that happen?
And then that's what I'm saying is like I think us looking at the issue as a privilege versus poor is not the thing, because just because you're poor does not automatically lead you into the environment of exploitation. It is right. Let's take the cacao and the Ivory Coast, for example. Cacao does not grow natively in Africa. It was exported over because there's certain areas within the tropical zone that it can grow. Companies could not set up cheap enough farms in South and Central America to grow cacao, so they're like, hey, why don't we go over here? We already have, we can just have very cheap labor. And that is what drives trafficking is they want the highest costing product, but the labor either free or very minimal. Mm-hmm. And so they uprooted and started growing cacao in the Ivory Coast, and it has flourished. The child slavery industry has grown faster than the cacao plants itself, and that is what we got to look at. We're giving too much power to companies. We're giving too much power to governments. We're giving too much power to people that don't have people in their best interest. They give a lot of lip service, and they're just trying to line pockets. Mm-hmm. Going after the poor and the impoverished, they're not the problem. They're not the victims. They're
right.
Well, and it's fun, and I want to make sure that clear. That's not what we're saying. I mean, all human beings need emotional, intellectual, physical growth. Like, we have these holistic components that make for the good life, the philosophical, the good life, whatever that means. But I mean, as far as going after,
we're more than instinctual.
Yeah, thank you. But even it's funny because IJM's big thing. You talk about going after the people who are doing the oppressing, not just the poor and the oppressed. IJM's big thing is going after the Johns and the oppressors and the companies.
And just to clarify, IJM is International
Justice Mission.
Yeah, that's the group that you talked about earlier. Just to make sure people are not putting the connection.
Full of lawyers.
IJM.org.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk more about on that, but go ahead.
But, I mean, their big thing, in fact, Gary Hogan's verse was the whole idea of you can't rob a strong man's house unless you first tie up the strong man. And so for them, they do equal amounts of going after the oppressors, the traffickers, and researching and going undercover and prosecution. And they do an equal amount of rescue and recovery care and all those things. So, yes, it does need to be equal parts because you need to change the systemic system. Actually, a lot of the anti-prostitution laws in the U.S., a lot of them would prosecute the girls. And so you would have these girls, some of whom were forced into it, who then have these criminal records when they were the victim. And so there was actually some laws in Virginia, and I think the laws ended up getting passed that kind of gave more room for the girls and allowed the road to recovery. Initially, it was kind of getting blocked by certain officials who didn't want to add more laws to the books, but I think they ended up giving in. I'm not going to say names, but...
which is scary for them to have criminal records when the average age of entry is 13 years old. Yeah. Like off the bat, college is limited, occupations are limited.
Yeah, and how do you feel about laws to do this instead of that are put in place? I mean, like, okay, immigration is definitely a place where they could be trained,
right?
And they could know key signs, they could know things. But how do you feel about laws? Because there are laws against slavery in the United States. There are laws against all these things that are happening right now. But
and yet,
happening.
We are on the same page.
So with that said, how do you feel about the laws on the books?
Yeah. Well, I think laws are important. I'll say that. I think that corruption is kind of the hammer that knocks like the nail of poverty and just kind of keeps it down, because you're always going to have those exceptions that will just kind of blow it. Like you can have rules, but unless they're enforced, they don't do anything. Which is kind of a cool thing about IJM is that they are an American organization, but when they prosecute internationally, they use the country's own laws to prosecute the oppressors and stuff.
Their precedent for the next case.
Right, exactly. To say, listen, your country does have these laws, you need to enforce them. I think it's really sad. I think that there does need to be, harsher repercussions for the people that break them, no matter where they are on the hierarchy of society. In a sense.
It's like Hershey's and their CEOs. They know what the hell's going on. I'm looking at you, Hershey's.
Well, not each Hershey's anymore. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think that ultimately, where was it? I'm going to get the story wrong, but where the girls, it was just turned around, where the girls used to be the ones that, I think, this is so awful. I think it was the U.S. actually that, maybe I shouldn't say this on.
Okay, this story is speculative in nature because some of the details may be wrong, but it'll sound good and hopefully get you motivated.
Ooh.
Okay, tell it. There's pressure now.
There is pressure.
Well, if you don't remember the details, you don't have to, but...
I'm pretty sure it's the U.S. and where now, if a male is caught buying or selling a girl, they get fined plus 5 years.
I didn't hear the 5 years. I think it is the U.S. that we're talking about, but I didn't hear about the 5 years. That's good.
But the Swedish model is what started that. Have you heard about the Swedish model? And that's where they started the whole trend of actually prosecuting.
We'll talk about it since our listeners may not know.
Sure, the Swedish model. Yeah. Sweden actually, as opposed to somewhere like Amsterdam, where it's just completely red carpet, prostitution is legal. Sweden started actually prosecuting the pimps, the Johns, the traffickers, and victimizing. Sorry, but making the girls legitimate victims so that they wouldn't get the criminal record, that they wouldn't be the ones that are thrown in jail. So, anyway, and it showed remarkable drop in the amount of trafficking in Sweden, and other countries have now started the same trend.
So what is your organization or other organizations that you're familiar with are doing to, because we do know that the laws, they're there, they're not being enforced.
Right.
So the second thing that you would do in any activist group, any individual, any community that finds injustice, their next step is to get together and make the powers that be to enforce those laws. And the way they would do this in this situation would be teach their community warning signs. It's like if you see, especially since in California and Texas and Florida, when you see individuals leaving with the same people every day, and when they're not speaking for themselves, when they're not acting independently, when they're not, when they're being spoken for, those are warning signs. Yeah. Those are warning signs that
using 2 cell phones.
Every community, every community should know. Every individual should know. So when they see it, there's, they can call the hotline. They can call. Which I should have wrote down the hotline. I didn't. I'll put it up in the show notes, and to report those. And even if you might be wrong, they still want to know know the information because they can investigate it.
Right. It's worse if you were wrong.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, what is your group or any other group that you may be affiliated with doing to help educate the community outside of trying to get these other countries in our country to embrace the laws?
Well, IJM actually has a lot of chapters, like the one at Regent, where I started it, but all over the country on different campuses and stuff. But we do education, awareness, and pressuring, like you said, the legislation in the different states and the communities that we are on the local and state level. So awareness, education, they usually kind of go together. But we've done partner with ODU to do, they call it the Justice Jubilee. And that had state prosecutors and attorneys and advocates and different nonprofit presidents come, and we did a Q&A session. We showed a short documentary called Alone.
A documentary, short film by a Regent student called Alone.
Called Alone, 13 minutes long.
Daniel McCullum.
Woohoo!
No showboating here.
Works for Exodus Cry now, another organization.
You're awful. We did a silent auction, and the proceeds went to IJM, so stuff like that. We also went up to Richmond and partnered with the Richmond Justice Initiative to pressure senators, governor, when all of the laws that Matt was talking about was kind of being processed.
So when you're pressuring the senators and legislation, what are you doing on the community level? Are you actually showing people warning signs, stuff like that, like outside of preaching to the choir of the group that comes there,
right?
How you're reaching out to community that are not going to be coming to whatever facility.
Well, IJM at Regent is a student organization, so we realize that there's strength in numbers, and so we really try. There's actually a lot of organizations in the Hampton Roads area that are doing stuff, so we try to connect them and support them. So Virginia Beach Justice Initiative, every Thursday they have a meeting, and they talk and they give updates on what's happening, and they do little educational, they pick a topic kind of a thing. And so they have done explicit things with, here are warning signs. There's another one called Release Me, and that one is actually, it's very new, but it's geared towards counselors, guidance counselors, and school nurses, actually. Oh, nice. And they go into schools and they do trainings for the teachers, the guidance counselors, and the nurses for exactly what you're talking about, the warning signs. And in Hampton, it actually, like, they went in, they did a training, and literally like a week later, a nurse was like, definitely happening. So
what's the figures that people who are held in bondage who are going to public schools or going to?
I don't know.
That's fascinating, because I don't think I've ever heard a case where, outside of what you just mentioned, of somebody held in bondage actually. Because
actually, the Candace, I'm sorry, that's not her name. She just went up and
Paula?
Nope, not Paula. I should know this. I'm so sorry. Anyway, president of Release Me Ministries. She, every time she goes in, she says no less than 5 girls have come up to her afterwards and said, and it's like usually junior highs, which again, the entry age is like 12 to 14. And have said to her either like, that's happening to me, or my friend, like whatever. So it's really common.
Wow.
And 300,000 is the conservative number of American teens that are at risk within the U.S.
Yeah.
So,
it's insane.
Well, it's funny too.
And Hampton Roads is a transit area.
Yeah, that makes it all the more worse. Actually, there was a story on the Huffington Post 1-2 years ago about some of the J-1 visa students down at the oceanfront, pretty much being used for slave labor, not being paid well, having to eat at Judeo-Christian Rescue Center, or whatever it's called, the Judeo-Christian Rescue Mission down there. And that was in this slew of stories about J-1 visa students coming over here, student workers. In Miami, some of the girls had to work as strippers. Like, some of them were living in the same type of slavery quarters, like 15 to a room of 3.
Yeah.
So it happens locally.
Yeah. Chandra Moyer, that's her name. I just remembered.
That's good. So it sounds like the IJM is doing a lot of good work, but there's one thing that I have to bring up, which
do it.
Under the section of getting involved, what you can do, there is the prayer section. Explain what that's about.
Well,
you actually asked the right person.
Oh, me? I was going to put it to you.
Nope. I have just
funny.
Shoot and then deflect.
Yeah, you did that really well.
She used to be the prayer coordinator for the IJM chapter. And go.
And go.
Wow, big bus.
I promised I wouldn't do that.
But you did it.
I should answer this question. I really should. Go ahead.
It sounds like y'all are deflecting the questions. So
no, we're good. IJM is a Christian organization, and they really believe that it goes beyond the physical level of you need food, water, shelter, and if you don't have those things, then you cannot move up in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all of that. But they really believe that it's tied to, and I would agree, a spiritual root. A spiritual root. And because in the end, I believe that each person has intrinsic value. And if you are so caught up in, like just those basic human rights necessities, and you don't even have those, there's no way that I'm going to see Matt as like, oh, your intrinsic value and I should give to you. And oh, like even just in small ways, even giving of your time to Matt, like I would just hoard go ahead. You're about to cut me off anyway.
No. This is just me getting ready just in case. Did you have something else?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, prayer, because I know the question is always, people could pray and a lot of stuff doesn't happen. I wasn't
going to say that. I'm just.
I said a lot of people could. I'm waiting for next week's episode of Non-Religious Life. Yeah. The power of prayer. No, I think prayer does. I think prayer is. Oh, right. I'm not allowed to tap the table because the mics are on the table. So, the power of prayer.
Somebody's been a smart ass.
Yeah, that's me. One of the things prayer does, I think, is it puts you in tune with God himself. And that ends up giving you God's heart for the situation. I think that's one thing prayer does, is it drives you closer to that union with God, which leads you into your mission for God. I think, secondly, one of the things you see in... because God is all about timing. Like, things don't... There's always this idea in Scripture of the fullness of time. Like, there's always the promise, a waiting period, and then boom. All these things converge, and the right thing happens at the right time in terms of God's timing. So... in Revelation, you see this idea of prayers being poured into this bowl, and the bowl is waiting to be filled. And I think that's one image we have of prayer, where at some point there is the hope and the belief that that prayer is piling up over time, and that eventually God's going to break out in some way, maybe in a local level, maybe one person's life somehow. And again, that prayer really becomes a matter of the faith perspective, because you end up trusting in the invisible to do something. And, again, it's the perspective of, was that coincidence or was that whatever? But I will say that I don't want to make prayer just simply out to be either a relationship with God, happens, or a relationship, or just maybe something will happen. I mean, there have been incidences I know of in certain people's lives where they've prayed for people and stuff has happened. I don't know if you want to talk about that. You don't have to, but I mean, there is the belief and the faith that something will happen from
and that's great philosophy if you do follow that. But what is
tell the story?
You don't have to.
IJM doing when they ask people? Are they asking individuals who are not involved or who feel they can't get involved to pray for certain issues, or how does it work? 'Cause I can understand getting involved. It's like, okay, you need to write this in it, or you need to, put this leaflet out. You need to do, physical steps. And I'm just asking, because
if you want, totally optional. Not personally you, but anybody can be on their like prayer email list, and they will send
this
you.
This is not like, well, I guess it would be Pat Robertson, because it's never mind. Sorry.
That was good. So
you both work there. Just kidding.
But you can be on their monthly prayer list, and they will send you updates of the current cases that are going on in all of their different establishments around the world that they're working in. And so specific ones that their caseworkers, lawyers will tell you about, or whatever, like going to court on, for this case or whatever, be praying that it's favorable for the victim or whatever. Yeah. So.
And the main reason I asked this question is not to put you on the spot and make you defend your faith or anything, is because I wanted to show that this entire show we talked about important issues. We talked about things that can be done, that people can do. We didn't go into great detail about what can be done, but I just wanted to ask that question to let the listeners know that there's only one piece of action step that separates IJM or any other religious group, or I shouldn't say any other, but anyone that we would support. There's only one element different, and that's that they have a belief in prayer or spiritual deity. I guess that would be
You're fine.
Versus the goal at the end of the night is to help get these people out of bondage, and at the end of the day, if they pray to help give them more strength to do so, it's still no different from us crying and saying, why the fuck is this happening?
Exactly.
So,
as the prophets of old.
No, I'm not trying to be
no
philosophical. I'm just saying.
I'm just kidding.
P.S. Props that every week you give people something tangible that they can do. I was very excited about that because I feel like this issue gets talked about a lot, but nothing really happens on a regular basis. Not to cut you off.
No, it's fine. No, it's just we do need to have people do more stuff. So we're going to take a break, and Matt wants to introduce a book to you.
Yeah.
And
this
is a tangible thing to do.
You know, I myself just signed up for the Audible free trial the other day and got a book that I really wanted that was offered on another program. This week, for Coalesce, we are offering the book Half the Sky by Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl, how do you pronounce it? Wooden? Yes. Okay. Half the Sky, Turning Oppression into Opportunity for Women Worldwide. So this is available at www.audiotrial.com/zombiepopcorn. No hyphen in that zombie popcorn, just zombie popcorn. And this would be a book I highly recommend. Kristof is a New York Times writer, and he's very much involved in the human trafficking fight. And so he deals with a lot of issues: trafficking, poverty, women's oppression generally. He deals with the issue of rape in Congo, the need for fistula surgeons in Africa, and so forth. So it's a really good book to check out. Please check out this book.
I have not read the book yet. I'm actually going to download it on Audible tonight. Is this a religious-based book?
It is not.
And the reason I'm asking that is because a lot of people don't want. So this is written from a person from what background? Of working with the United Nations, working as
New York Times.
New York Times.
He's a writer from New York Times. Yep.
So it's investigative reporting, pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like he when he went overseas, I think Cambodia, he was like to interview a couple of girls that were in trafficking. It really confronted him, and he says his most unprofessional act of his job ever was buying them out of slavery, and he had to call the lawyers and be like, "Can I really do this?" But he did.
Well, that's a good topic that we want to make a part of a show. Is like, is buying people out of slavery a valid strategy? And maybe that'd be our next episode.
He said one of them stayed with their family and the other one went back because they were addicted to meth a week later.
Yeah, meth does that.
Yeah,
which leads to another issue of like how they end up keeping the girls in bondage. Yep. Part of it's through drug addiction.
Yeah, which Jason said.
Which you've seen the movie Taken, which I would also recommend, even though it's just going to be Liam Neeson kicking butt.
Isn't that all of his movies?
Yeah.
So let's we have like 10 minutes left. Let's talk about the different types. I know we've kind of highlighted different types of trafficking throughout the show, but let's get down to the dirty parts of it. It's like the different types of trafficking, how many people are involved, where the numbers are coming from. You want to talk about that?
Well, on a whole, the conservative estimate is 27 million. That number only includes victims who have gone through a court system. They've had their case heard. So that's a very conservative number. For instance, Thailand only claims to have 50 sex slaves, but they have 1,500 known brothels. So you can imagine.
Wait, back up.
Yep.
You said they only have 50?
50.
50.
50. They claim.
Less than 100.
Right, but they have 1,500 known brothels. So that shows.
How does the UN look at that? I mean, like with their report, because I know they.
If you get an answer, you let me know.
Yeah, seriously, because I mean, the reason I bring this up is because if you look at the UN document when it talks about human trafficking or trafficking of persons, there are a lot of sections left out that they don't recognize as human trafficking. But I guess that'd be another story. But anyway.
Well, and because I feel like because they have reports like that, everything they need to be able to prove it.
Yeah.
And so the 27 million are the ones that they can prove because they've gone through the court systems.
Wow. That's heavy.
Yeah. So
there's a article that you shared with us earlier that broke down trafficking by region. And that article is by MSNBC. You want to talk about that and kind of give the numbers on that?
Yeah. Which I don't know. We may end up posting some of these to the site. I know we talked about that. I don't know if we'll do that. We might not. Who knows? But here are the numbers. North America, Europe, kind of the westernized world. I think Canada falls in here too because they were color-coded as the same. North America, Western Europe, Australia, the number was 1,500,000.
And this is just so the numbers, because it does get extremely confusing when you're starting to look at the numbers and you're comparing. I didn't look at the details of this report of what they included and excluded from it. So the numbers could be different depending on who you're getting your source from, but still the numbers are up in the multiple millions.
Right. Some of these numbers were different than some of the ones I've seen. I think they cited 20.9 million. The usual estimate is 27. Yeah. For sex slaves, they had 4.5 million. The usual estimate is 2.5. But then again, you also have issues of like forced marriage and child brides.
Yeah, which they definitely forced marriage is very rarely stuck in the equation of the question.
And if you lumped in child soldiers to forced labor, I mean that becomes a whole other.
And sex trafficking within that.
No, it's just just on top of each other.
Yeah.
But anyway, the westernized world was 1,500,000. South America 1.8, or excuse me, 1,500,000. Yeah, that was right. 1.8 mil for South America. Russia, Turkey, and Eastern Europe were 1.6 million. Southeast Asia was 11.7 million. The Middle East was 600,000, and Africa was 3,700,000. So, and I even put a note in the show notes that there are definitely more than this.
Yes, those are generous numbers. Those are.
I also put it through in one more number here. We have a friend who's very much into the whole domestic slave trade in the U.S. in particular. So
just in U.S. alone.
U.S. alone, not imported from Mexico or Europe or Asia. 300,000 children in the U.S. are at risk every year for sexual exploitation.
Just for sexual exploitation.
Right.
And our government spends more money on protecting spotted owls than they do on recovery efforts for children who are at risk.
Well, there's
Nothing
a reason
against
there's more children
spotted
than there
owls.
are spotted owls. So I'm just
Animal activist.
Yes, I had to speak up for him. Yes, here in the States, even Case, their video that we highlighted last week, they focus a lot on sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, and it tears me up that this happens, but for some reason it hits the nerve when I find out that they target handicaps, people who are either physically or mentally handicapped, and so they can use them as commodities. There's
injustice, exploitation of vulnerability.
Yeah. It's insane.
What I found interesting was when I was looking for the numbers on organ trafficking, I had a really hard time finding.
Well, nobody focuses on that. I was
going to say, it looks like, from what I could gather, it's just kind of coming into vogue, which I have a WHO article on it. And what was really sad is reading the different types of organ trafficking. You have organ trafficking where you trick a person into thinking they need a surgery and then they don't, and then you take an organ. Yeah. They know they're giving an organ, but you defraud them from payment. And then the third way is just torturing them, killing them, taking the organ by force.
Well, there's also been, I've read cases where people who actually have legitimate surgeries go in, but they come out with more parts missing. You know, it's like they're going in for like an appendix or something, some typical, medical surgery, and then they come out, with things that they didn't donate. Missing, and it's insane. I mean, that happened here in the States. There was like 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago in New Jersey. That was going on. But
the big ring that got busted. Because it was like there were like, I know there was
an abortion clinic or whatever, but it really wasn't. It was organ harvesting.
There were like politicians, clergymen, like a lot of stuff was mixed in there.
It was some messed up stuff. And going back to you saying that, we need to stick it to no matter what level they are, those people need to have it stuck to.
It's true.
But there are 3 action steps that we have for you to do this week. 4 if you count the book, which we will count the book.
Education, first key.
Yeah. Audio trial. No, audible trial. Audible, not audio. I used to make that mistake.
We will have the text in the show notes.
Simple copy and paste.
As you know, if you listen to my other show, The New Architects, we've interviewed Lauren from the Food Empowerment Project many of times, and we've talked about forced labor bondage in the United States when it comes to the food that you eat, whether it's the tomato farmers in Florida or the farmers in Arizona. She also, her organization focuses on the cacao industry, and she and her volunteers have gone to great lengths to create a large list of companies who use chocolate, and whether it's just their main focus is chocolate or they have chocolate pieces in their product, to find out where they get their sources from. Because if you're into this issue, you know that 100% of all cacao that comes from the Ivory Coast and of Africa is almost guaranteed to be forced labor, child labor. So focusing on your buying purchases on cacao or chocolate that comes from Latin America is the direction that you should go. Just because you're getting it from Latin America does not exclude it from being some kind of exploitation, but the chances are the percentage is very small compared to what is guaranteed in the Ivory Coast. So what they've done is they compiled a huge list and asked all these companies what their source of chocolate is. So you have the list of companies who source their chocolate from the Ivory Coast and South Africa, or of Africa, and the list of good chocolate that you could eat that doesn't support forced labor, child slavery. They have a petition right now on change.org, which I'll put the link in the show notes, asking Cliff Bar to release their source, because they approached Cliff Bar and they refused to give out their source of where they get the cacao, and that can only mean one or two things: they got something to hide, or they got something to hide. So, so they're asking them just to let them. It is the same, yes. So they're just asking them to let them know. They're not talking about. They don't want to know what farms they get it from. They don't want to know, their supply chain. They just want to know their source. Are they getting it from Latin America, or are they getting it from Africa? That's all they're asking, and they're refusing to do it. So there's a petition to kind of put pressure on Cliff Bar to let their sources be known, because Cliff Bar, their marketing campaign and their whole food line is about ethical, foods, and about being responsible for your food choices. They just align themselves with the Rainforest Alliance. They care about these issues, and the people who consume their chocolates and consume their goods care about these issues too. And they don't want to. I know a lot of people that don't want to buy food from, exploitive companies, and they're going to lose a lot of business if they don't do this. So help put the pressure on them. Go to the Food Empowerment Project, change.org petition, which I'll put the link in the show notes so you can do that. And the other action step, if you're curious about knowing what your slavery footprint is, Matt sent this link. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's called slaveryfootprint.org. It's by a group called Call and Response. And it measures, it has you calculate, you could probably explain it a little bit better.
Sure. Well, you're always pushing everything off on her.
Hey, I'll explain that third one, but yeah, explain slavery footprint.
Sure. Slavery footprint, actually the State Department asked Call and Response to create this device. If you can all remember, like, your green footprint, and you could calculate, how green or, whatever your footprint was. This one calculates how many slaves work to support your lifestyle. The first time I took it, there were 40, and I was like, oh my word. And I consider myself a minimalist. All my clothes can fit into one.
Both of you.
One carry-on toothpaste. You outbeat us.
I got 27.
Well, good for you.
Wow.
Yeah. You're only.
I'm
Never mind.
impressed.
So, but anyway, finish.
I had 40. I had the most here. Of the three of us, I had the most.
But nobody knows what we're talking about yet, because
it's true. So take the slavery footprint. You basically go through and you just through a series of choices, tell them about your lifestyle, how many electronics you have, how many pairs of shoes, clothes, what kind of house you live in.
Electronics is what put my number up
high. I'm looking around. I would imagine so.
Stupid iPhone.
And then it will calculate how many slaves work to support your lifestyle. So it kind of puts your life into perspective, which is great. Well, I have microphone. I'm sorry. Call and Response. They what you're saying, I was just like, yes, about the pressure on the cocoa industry with Cliff, and really like consumers are kind of the end all. If there's no demand, then there won't be a supply. Yeah. And call and response takes exactly that. And on their website, they've expanded that, and the amount of companies keep adding, but you can go look up Gap, Johnson & Johnson, like really anything, Honda, J. Crew, H&M, and you can go and you can see if they've responded like they're wanting Cliff to do, and what their policy is on slave labor in their products and how closely they're monitoring their chain and stuff like that. And you can see the ones that they'll say like no response yet, and then you can send them letters and stuff like that. So anyway,
that's exactly what Food Empowerment Project is doing with it.
Yeah,
it's a good tactic. I mean,
it is.
It educates people as well as putting pressure on the companies who are being shady about things.
It's true, and they'll listen. Supply and demand. It ends with the
money.
dollar.
I mean, that's the only reason this industry exists. The slave industry and the forced labor industry and all that. The only reason it exists is because they want cheap labor. The companies want to make a lot of money and don't want to pay for it. So,
in the end, opium will always bring in more than saffron.
Yeah. That's just in her house. I mean,
actually, all of these curtains are made of pure hemp.
Children.
Yeah, strung together by children. Oh, actual children. That's sad. So stupid. Anyway,
you gotta laugh because that's one thing that our movement needs to keep is a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Because if we lose that, we lose the battle.
G.K. Chesterton actually once said that the test of the merit of a religion is how well it can take a joke.
Ooh, it failed. Anyway,
so that could apply to other areas of activist focus. The final step is the organization we talked about last week, 58. So at www.live58.org/survive125. I just found this the other day. I almost found it by accident or by divine providence. That
I'm going to say accident.
I think I'm going to go with accident on this one. Sorry, man.
Traitor.
Remember the bus.
So fair enough. www.live58.org/survive125. It's actually a game that you can play to see how long you could last living in conditions of extreme poverty. In other words, living on $1.25 a day. So I actually made it to day 17. What day did you make it to?
14.
Old high maintenance McPhee over here couldn't go without her medicine.
I kept my son in school. What can I say?
So that's a really cool thing. And then they do ask you to do an action step when you fail. Because you'll fail. Because at some point you'll go, this would have been necessary.
Well, I don't know. One of the members of board advisors from Food Empowerment Project wrote a book of how to live on $1 a day. Not anything relevant to this. I just thought it was funny.
We'll take it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Any closing remarks?
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you so much for coming on. It was very enlightening. I enjoyed talking to you.
Same to you.
Yeah.
Great thoughts.
You, I don't.
Yeah. I enjoyed having Jason's frog-like twin brother here because he has a sick voice.
Yes, I have a sick voice. But anyway,
I'm not
that's
very
it.
funny. Yeah.
Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, comments, please, as always, give us a call. Find the phone number on the website. Give us an email, also on the website. Just do whatever. Just let us know what you think. If there's a group that you want to work with, want us to feature, want us to talk about, or if there's a group that you want us to promote, if there's a group that you don't think is doing good works and you want to expose them, we'll look into it and we'll talk about it. So have a good night.